Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about failures. So let's get into it. So the question in question is, hi Frederick, why do so many large IT projects fail to meet expectations, exceed budgets and or surpass deadlines? Uh, because talent doesn't scale. Uh, that's usually the reason. So fundamentally, the thing that does really well usually when we talk about innovative projects or very well established companies or products that happen and sort of take over absolutely everything is that you usually have a person or a group of people who have enormous amounts of talent and skill usually. I mean, luck also plays in. You have to be the right person at the right time and all these sorts of factors. So there's a lot of things that has to go right in the first place, right? But the issue is that that doesn't really scale because, as you might have noticed, there are more people around who are just quote unquote ordinary than there are people who are superstars of whatever they're doing, right? And so when you're dealing with the development of something that requires more than one person, the more people you add, the more likely you are to have miscommunications, the more likely you are to have something within the whole thing that doesn't really work all that well. And there's very few people who understand just how costly it is to get to, especially the more complicated products of the world. And I'm not just talking IT now, I'm talking just in general, like the cost it has we have gotten the cost of like developing something sophisticated like a car or new medicine or things like that can be like the process of learning how to do that at the sort of scale we're doing it today is fairly expensive. It's very difficult to get to that point. And so a lot of these IT projects that you might see that, well, you probably may or may not have been involved in them, it really comes down to that the larger the organization grows or the larger the project grows, the more likely you are to have some component, some service, some team, or so forth, make mistakes, miscommunication might happen, things might not align correctly, people might be building something in one way in one part of the system, and that causes issues for another part of the system, which now leads to compromises and all this sort of stuff, right? So you can imagine for an average software team, if you only deal with a single code base, that it's fairly likely that when you hire software developers, even in a single team, it's very unlikely that you will find, an average team is about 2 to 5 people, maybe 8-ish, something like that. What are the odds that you will find that amount of people just for one team that are all super gifted, all have the sort of like genius that is required to do something really, really awesome, or at the very least have the same sort of opinion on how to achieve the goals that they want to achieve, right? Fairly low. I would say if you've done any hiring, you will know how long it takes to find just one truly talented developer, for example. Now imagine that you need to get a product manager or someone who can do that, and you need to get like other teams that sort of align. You need to have people who are efficient at understanding how to make people communicate. Like you need managers that are efficient and so forth and so forth. Like it just grows. Like it becomes very, very difficult. And so what usually happens is that it becomes a little bit like how it becomes for software developers when they work on a product that is too big. And this is at least what I argue. I argue that a human that fails to account for the fact that they have a limited amount of things that they can keep in their head at any given time, and doesn't design a solution that allows you to segment the problem into smaller pieces, divide and conquer, is doomed to fail whatever they're doing. And translated into code, that basically means, as I've said to you guys before, if you want to learn a code base, you will never be able to just sit and read everything. You're never going to understand it, because if it's a large enough system, it's impossible for you to know how all the components work. It's the same thing like trying to understand how do you ship this large IT project. There's an approach that a lot of people are using today, which is like higher level planning, which is usually what happens at management in larger companies. They try to do top-down planning and things like that, which is basically impossible, because because, as I said, like the system is literally too big that it's not going to be an efficient model. But on the other hand, it's also fairly inefficient from a planning perspective and sort of understanding what's going to be delivered and communication and aligning people to not do central planning, because if you let everybody just do whatever they want, as I've said before, that basically means that everybody has to be equal talent. You have no control, and you just have to hope that you can communicate with all of these people and that they talk to each other and so forth. So this is an enormously complicated problem. It's a problem of talent, not just in tech. It's a problem of talent in management, talent in hiring the right people, understanding who you need for the roles and so forth. And it's a problem when it comes to communication and aligning people and so forth. And these are and to add on top of this, the technical skills that are required in order to sort of see how to fit everything together and then communicate between all of these different people makes it borderline impossible for you to have management or the classical structures that you use today in most companies and have all that just fit gracefully. So that's the argument that I make, that usually the reason why these sorts of things go over budget and so forth is because literally the problem is that you have a system that is so sophisticated that most people just take ownership of one piece of the whole thing, and that's sort of it. And the thing that I see that usually works the best for these sorts of larger scale projects is when you have technical people who and managers and so forth who efficiently can bridge each other's ignorance, if that makes sense. Because a product manager will need to talk to stakeholders, or you need, in some cases, you might not need a product manager. You might need a tech lead or someone like more technical to take charge of it. Because what you basically need is fairly highly talented people who know how to deliver results, but also have a fairly strong understanding of the need to collaborate between different systems. So rather than having people who simply focus on their area, you have people who understand that I have to make my area fit in as a building block or a cog into what everybody else is doing, and it is in my interest to be aware of some type of to have some type of community or some type of connection to all my people, the people around me, so that the thing that I'm building is the right thing for the people who are basically my customers. That's the thing that usually fails. Most projects fail due to the fact, as I said, the internals, like all the systems that you see, like companies are in some cases, even in many cases, they're shit at this as well. They have very little of the thing that I'm talking about, but they also don't really have a focus on the user, a product focus, because, as I said, like nobody's really owning the overall quality of the entire system, because they're just taking care of one piece, and they only care about their piece. But to be effective, you basically have to have customer focus to start off with, on top, together with all of these technical requirements and the communication talents and so forth. So it's a problem of enormous complexity. And I have to this day never seen, as basically at the very least, it's not common to find, say, even a software team, even a set of developers who will take the time to, say, design a really nice API for the other services that are going to connect to them in a big system. Like, you mean, if you're lucky, you'll get to a company where they care about the user interface and the user experience. That's an achievement, just getting that. But finding like developers who also share that sort of sensation of let's make something nice and so forth, and then consistently can do that and has the talent to align and do all the things and like talk to other teams to make sure that they're developing APIs according to good standards and stuff like that. As I said, guys, it's usually a question of size. For most people, it's too big, too much work, and so they sort of just try to segment what they are responsible for down to, I own these things, these are the things that my manager hold me accountable to, so that's what I'm going to focus on, and everything else is sort of on everybody else. So what I want you to take away from this is that usually the reason why a large IT project fails, at least from what I can see, is because, as I said, one part is that it's raw talent. it requires talent. You have to have a way to manage multiple systems, and usually it's difficult to just find the right talents for one system. And the more people you need to add, the more likely you are to have a problem with people developing in different ways and so forth. And control and quality control of a large system is enormously complicated. Just keeping like you usually have some teams that are super efficient in many cases, some teams that are underperforming, some teams that has tons of legacy or like just churns out problems, etc., etc. It's very difficult to do quality control across an entire, like a large system. On top of that, you have issues with communication, alignment, planning, and like product perspective, what should be prioritized and so forth, because you have in many cases a management level that may or may not actually know how anything works, and they may not actually know how tech work, etc., etc. There are no requirements usually on managers to know anything about that. So if that means that the leadership itself in many cases may be quite wonky, which means that if you don't have a good dialogue with your developers, you sort of have this disconnect, which is why I tell people that the most valuable thing that you can have is a truly senior software developer, because then you basically have one single individual who can lead the project, fix all the tech, plan all the backlog. Like you have one individual who has this holistic perspective of what needs to be done, and that is more powerful than all the people that you can possibly hire in like who know one piece of that thing. And that brings us to the last problem, which is the scale of the whole thing and the user focus. It's very difficult to have this holistic ownership of not just your area, but also understand how your area fits into the whole, and have this dialogue across teams and across departments, so that you actually align on how all this is going to fit together. Because all it takes is for a few parts of that system to not be well working and so forth, and it affects everything. And so if you have departments, which, as I said, it's very difficult to get that user focus, where the development team that work with each other, they are treating each other nicely, and they have good APIs towards each other, and they have a good collaboration with different departments, with design, product, etc., etc. Everybody sort of gets along, and on top of that, they need to have people who are talented in, like, when it comes to user focus and creating good user experiences. All these things has to happen across hundreds, if not thousands, of people, and then you need to make that a systematic thing, because, as I said, if you just hire people, it's not going to happen by itself. That's been proven many times, and that is unfortunately the reason why you see this sort of results that you have, because nobody's really found it's very rare to find a company that has a scalable solution to this issue. Have a great day.